The thing about betrayal is that it always comes with champagne. Good champagne, too, the kind that costs more than my car payment. I should have known something was wrong when Nola insisted on Cristal for our engagement party. My grandmother would have called it putting on airs. She would have been right. 60 guests packed into the ballroom at the Meridian Hotel, crystal flutes catching the light from those ridiculous chandeliers Nola had specifically requested. Men in suits that cost more than I made in a month. Women wearing jewelry that could fund a small country. And me, Silas Orrin, standing there in my best jacket, which was still my only jacket, wondering how I'd gotten so lucky. Turns out I hadn't. Ladies and gentlemen, Nola's voice cut through the polite chatter as she tapped her manicured nails against her champagne flute. The sound rang out like a dinner bell, and every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the small stage where the hotel had set up a microphone for toasts. My fiancée looked stunning up there. She always did. Auburn hair swept into some complicated arrangement that probably cost more than my rent. Emerald dress that hugged every curve and made her green eyes pop. The diamond engagement ring, my grandmother's ring, the one I'd had reset for her, catching the light on her left hand as she adjusted the microphone. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying that slight southern accent she'd never quite lost, despite 15 years in San Francisco. "It means so much to have our families and friends here to celebrate this special moment." I smiled and raised my own glass, playing the part of the devoted groom-to-be. Around me, 60 faces smiled back, Nola's parents beaming with pride, her cousin Damon nursing his whiskey in the corner, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. My best friend Ben giving me a thumbs up from near the bar. Even Felix Roard, the lawyer who'd helped me navigate my grandmother's estate, had shown up in his expensive suit and political smile. "When Silas and I met 2 years ago," Nola continued, "I knew there was something special about him." Her eyes found mine across the room, and for just a moment, I felt that old flutter in my chest. He was so different from the other men I'd dated, so genuine, so stable. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. I'd heard this story before, usually when Nola wanted to emphasize how I wasn't like her usual type, which apparently meant I wasn't rich enough or connected enough or whatever enough, but I'd learned to take it as a compliment. "And when he proposed last month," she said, holding up her hand so the diamond caught the light, "I was so happy. Not because I was in love." She paused, and something cold slithered down my spine. "But because I just needed a ring, not you." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming. Somewhere in the back of the room, a glass hit the floor and shattered. Nobody moved to clean it up. I stared at Nola, certain I'd misheard, certain this was some kind of joke that would make sense in another second. But she stood there on that little stage, microphone in one hand, champagne in the other, looking directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost bored. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say, though my voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "What did you just say?" "I said I just needed a ring, not you." Her voice was clearer now, projected through the microphone for everyone to hear. "The engagement was never about love, Silas. It was about timing." 60 faces turned toward me like sunflowers following the sun. I could feel their stares, their shock, their pity. In the corner, Damon was smirking into his whiskey. Felix looked like he was trying to disappear into his expensive suit. Ben had gone completely still, his hand frozen halfway to his mouth. The smart thing would have been to storm out, to make a scene, to demand explanations or throw accusations or do any of the things a normal person might do when their fiancé publicly humiliated them in front of everyone they knew. Instead, I walked calmly across the ballroom floor, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Nola watched me approach, her chin lifted in defiance or challenge, or maybe just indifference. When I reached the stage, I extended my hand, palm up. I'll take the ring back, I said quietly. For the first time since she'd grabbed the microphone, Nola looked uncertain. Silas, we should talk about this privately. The ring, I repeated. She glanced around the room, perhaps suddenly realizing that her audience was still watching, still listening. Her parents looked mortified. Her friends looked confused. Her cousin Damon looked disappointed, though I couldn't figure out why. Slowly, Nola twisted the diamond off her finger. It was warm when she dropped it into my palm, and heavier than I remembered. I closed my fingers around it and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Thank you, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Enjoy the party. Then I turned and walked out of the ballroom, through the hotel lobby, and into the San Francisco night. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of 60 voices trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. But I didn't look back. Not once. The thing about walking away is that it's easy. The hard part comes after, when you're sitting in your car in a hotel parking lot, holding a diamond ring that used to represent your future, trying to figure out what the hell just happened to your life. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, watching guests trickle out of the hotel. Some of them looked around the parking lot, probably wondering if I was still there, if they should come check on me. But I'd parked in the back corner in the shadows between streetlights, and nobody ventured that far from the valet stand. My phone buzzed. Text message from Ben. Where are you? We need to talk. Then another from my sister in Portland. Mom just called. She heard from Aunt Carol, who heard from someone at the party. What happened? Then another from a number I didn't recognize. Saw the video. Holy crap, man. Video? I hadn't seen anyone filming, but then again, everyone had phones these days. Probably half the guests had recorded Nola's little speech for posterity. By tomorrow, it would be all over social media. By next week, it would be a cautionary tale people told at dinner parties. The engagement party from hell. The fiancée who said she just needed a ring, not a husband. The guy who walked away with his dignity intact. Or at least, that's how I hoped the story would go. My phone rang. Ben's name on the screen. You okay? He asked without preamble. Define okay. Are you somewhere safe? Are you planning to do anything stupid? I almost laughed. Ben had been a cop for 12 years before he quit to open a gym. He still thought like one sometimes, still worried about people doing things they'd regret later. I'm in my car, I said. And no, I'm not planning anything stupid, at least not tonight. Good. Listen, I'm leaving the party now. Most people already left anyway. You want company? Not really. Too bad. I'm coming over. We're going to drink beer and figure out what the hell just happened. The line went quiet, and I realized Ben had already hung up. That was Ben for you. He didn't ask permission. He just did what he thought needed doing. It was probably why he'd been a good cop and why he was a good friend. I started my car and drove home through empty streets, the diamond ring heavy in my pocket like a stone. My apartment was in the Mission, a one-bedroom place I'd been renting for 3 years. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Or it had been mine until last month, when Nola had started talking about us moving in together, about me giving up my lease, about combining our lives in all the ways that seemed romantic at the time and terrifying in retrospect. Thank God I hadn't listened to her about that. I parked on the street and climbed the stairs to my front door, fishing for keys with one hand while the other stayed in my pocket, wrapped around the ring. The hallway smelled like Mrs. Chen's cooking from downstairs, garlic and ginger and something else I couldn't identify. Normal smells, comforting smells, the kind of smells that reminded you the world kept turning even when your personal world had just imploded. Ben was waiting for me on the landing, 2 six-packs of beer in his hands. How did you get here so fast? I asked. I may have exceeded the speed limit. He followed me into the apartment and set the beer on my kitchen counter. Also, I may have left the party right after you did. Didn't see much point in sticking around for the aftermath. What aftermath? Ben cracked open a beer and handed it to me. Well, let's see. Nola tried to play it off like the whole thing was some kind of misunderstanding. said she'd been nervous and misspoke, but nobody was buying it, especially after what she said next. There was more? Oh, there was more. Ben's expression was grim. After you left, she got back on that microphone and told everyone that the engagement had been a mutual decision to part ways. Said you'd both realized you wanted different things. Tried to make it sound all civilized and mature. I took a long pull from my beer. And people believed that? Not even a little bit. Especially not after Damon started talking. Something cold settled in my stomach. What did Damon say? Nothing specific. But he was making comments about timing, about how some people don't know a good thing when they see it. And he kept looking at your friend Felix, like they shared some kind of joke. Felix roared. The lawyer who'd helped me navigate my grandmother's estate. The one who'd been so helpful, so accommodating, so eager to make sure everything went smoothly. The one who'd somehow ended up at my engagement party, even though I barely knew him outside of our professional relationship. Ben, I said slowly, how well do you know Felix? The lawyer? Not at all. Why? He's been handling my grandmother's estate. The probate should be wrapping up in the next few weeks. Ben set down his beer and looked at me with the expression he used to get when he was working a case and all the pieces suddenly started falling into place. Silas, he said carefully, when exactly did Nola start talking about marriage? I thought about it. Really thought about it going back through the timeline of our relationship. We'd been dating for almost 2 years, but the marriage talk had been recent. Very recent. About 3 months ago, I said. Right after I told her the estate was finally moving through probate. And when did she propose the engagement party? 6 weeks ago. She said she wanted to celebrate before we got too busy with wedding planning. Ben was quiet for a long moment, turning his beer bottle in his hands. When he looked up at me, his expression was serious. Silas, I think you need to consider the possibility that tonight wasn't just about Nola being cruel. I think it was about something bigger. Like what? Like money. Like your grandmother's money, specifically. The cold feeling in my stomach spread outward, creeping up my spine and into my chest. My grandmother had left me everything. The house in Marin, the investments, the savings account she'd been building for 60 years. It wasn't a fortune by San Francisco standards, but it was enough to change my life. Enough to buy a house, start a business, maybe even quit the consulting firm where I'd been grinding out 60-hour weeks for the past 5 years. But the estate is in my name, I said. Nola can't touch it. Not as your girlfriend, Ben agreed, but as your wife, that might be a different story. I stared at him, the implications sinking in like stones in deep water. The timing. Nola's sudden interest in marriage. The engagement party scheduled for just weeks before the probate was supposed to conclude. Felix's presence at the party, his helpful attitude throughout the estate process. You think they planned this? I said. I think, Ben said carefully, that you should take a very close look at who's been giving you advice about your grandmother's estate. And I think you should do it soon. Outside my window, San Francisco glittered in the darkness, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of stories. Most of them probably simpler than mine had become in the space of a single evening. Most of them probably didn't involve fiancés who grabbed microphones at engagement parties to announce they just needed a ring, not a husband. But as I sat there with my best friend, drinking beer and contemplating the possibility that I'd been played for a fool, I realized something important. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I wasn't just embarrassed or confused or heartbroken. I was angry, and anger, I was about to discover, could be a very useful emotion. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with the beer and everything to do with the fact that my life had become a country song overnight. Betrayed by my fiancée, suspicious of my lawyer, and nursing my wounds with alcohol and my best friend's conspiracy theories. All I needed was a pickup truck and a dog to complete the picture. but Ben's words kept echoing in my head as I made coffee and stared out at the gray San Francisco morning. The timing was too convenient. Nola's sudden interest in marriage, the engagement party, Felix's helpful involvement in my grandmother's estate, it all felt too coordinated to be coincidence. I needed to see the paperwork. Felix Roard's office was in the financial district, occupying half a floor of one of those glass towers that made San Francisco's skyline look like a corporate Christmas tree. I'd been there 3 times over the past year, each visit more reassuring than the last. Felix had seemed competent, professional, and genuinely interested in making sure my grandmother's wishes were carried out properly. Now I wondered what else he'd been interested in. "Mr. Orrin," the receptionist said when I walked in at 9:30. "I don't see you on Mr. Roard's calendar today." "It's urgent," I said, "about the Orrin estate." She made a phone call, spoke in hushed tones, then nodded toward the waiting area. "He'll see you in just a few minutes." The waiting area was all leather and mahogany and legal journals, designed to project an image of stability and success. I sat in one of the expensive chairs and tried to look like a man who belonged there, rather than a man whose fiancée had just publicly humiliated him in front of 60 people. "Silas!" Felix emerged from his office with his arms spread wide, like we were old friends meeting for lunch. "I heard about last night. I'm so sorry, my friend. These things happen, but still." "I need to review the estate documents," I said, without returning his smile. Something flickered across Felix's face, too quick to identify. Of course, though I'm not sure what you're looking for. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. Probate should conclude within the month." "I want to see everything. The original will, the inventory, the court filings, all of it." Felix's smile didn't waver, but it seemed to require more effort now. "Naturally. Though I should mention there have been some recent developments. Nothing serious, but your cousin has raised some questions about the estate." "My cousin, Damon Vossel, my grandmother's sister's grandson, the one who'd been smirking into his whiskey at the engagement party. The one Ben said had been making comments about timing." "What kind of questions?" "Oh, the usual family concerns. He suggested that your grandmother may not have been entirely competent when she updated her will. Completely baseless, of course, but these things have to be addressed through proper channels." I felt something cold and sharp settle behind my ribs. "Updated her will? When?" "About 18 months ago. She added a codicil that clarified some of the language around the property distribution. Nothing that changes the fundamental bequests, you understand, but important for tax purposes. 18 months ago, right around the time I'd started dating Nola seriously. Right around the time I'd mentioned to a few family members that I was seeing someone special." "I want to see that codicil," I said. "Of course. Let me have my assistant pull the files." Felix disappeared into his office, and I was left alone with the receptionist and my growing suspicions. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Bay Bridge stretching across the water, solid and reliable, and completely unlike everything else in my life at the moment. 20 minutes later, Felix returned with a thick folder and the expression of professional concern. "I've pulled everything," he said, settling behind his desk and opening the folder. "Now, I want you to understand that your cousin's concerns are purely procedural. There's no real question about your grandmother's competence or intentions." He handed me a stack of documents, and I began reading through them with the careful attention I usually reserved for consulting contracts. The original will was straightforward, everything to me with small bequests to a few charities my grandmother had supported. But the codicil was more complex, full of legal language that seemed designed to obscure rather than clarify. "What does this section mean?" I asked, pointing to a paragraph near the bottom of the codicil. Felix leaned forward to look. "That's just standard language about spousal inheritance rights. In the event that you were married at the time of distribution, it ensures that the estate transfer is handled properly for tax purposes. It says the spouse would have joint claim to any real property. Only in very specific circumstances. and only if the marriage predated the distribution by at least 60 days. 60 days. I thought about the timeline again. The engagement party had been scheduled for 6 weeks before probate was supposed to conclude. If Nola and I had married immediately after the engagement, she would have had legal standing to claim half of my grandmother's house. "Felix," I said carefully, "who suggested this codicil to my grandmother?" "I'm sorry?" "This language about spousal inheritance rights. Did my grandmother ask for it? Or did someone suggest she might need it?" Felix's smile became strained around the edges. "I'm not sure I understand the implication of your question, Silas. Your grandmother was very thorough about planning for all contingencies. She wanted to make sure that any future spouse of yours would be properly provided for. But I wasn't engaged when this codicil was written. I wasn't even seriously dating anyone. Your grandmother was a forward-thinking woman." I stared at him for a long moment, watching the way he avoided direct eye contact, the way his hands fidgeted with his pen. Ben had been right. This wasn't coincidence. "I want copies of everything," I said. "Of course, though I should mention, there will be copying fees. Bill me." An hour later, I walked out of Felix's office with a box full of documents and a head full of questions. But I also had something else, a clear sense of direction. For the first time since Nola had grabbed that microphone, I knew what I needed to do. I needed to find out exactly how deep this conspiracy went. My first stop was the coffee shop where Nola and I had met 2 years ago. She'd always claimed it was chance. She'd been there working on her laptop. I'd been grabbing coffee before a client meeting. We'd ended up sharing a table during the morning rush. A classic San Francisco meet cute. But now I wondered if it had been quite that simple. The coffee shop was in the Castro, a 15-minute walk from my apartment and nowhere near Nola's condo in Pacific Heights. She'd never adequately explained what she'd been doing there that morning, and I'd never thought to ask. But the barista who'd been working that day was still there, a young woman with purple hair and enough piercings to set off a metal detector. "I remember you," she said when I approached the counter. "You're the guy who met his girlfriend here. She used to come in and ask about you." "Ask about me?" "Yeah, for like a week before you guys actually talked. She'd come in every morning, order a latte, and ask if the tall guy with the dark hair had been in yet. Said she was trying to work up the courage to introduce herself." The cold feeling in my chest spread outward. She'd been watching me? I guess. I mean, it was kind of sweet at the time, but now that you mention it, it was also kind of weird, like she knew your schedule or something. I thanked her and walked back out into the gray morning, my mind racing. Nola had been stalking me before we met. She'd known my routine, my habits, probably my name and background. Our meeting hadn't been chance at all. My phone rang, Ben's name on the screen. "Where are you?" he asked. "Downtown, following up on some things." "Good, because I've been doing some following up of my own. We need to talk. Can you meet me at the gym?" Ben's gym was in the Mission, a no-frills place that catered to serious athletes rather than socialites looking to be seen working out. When I arrived, I found him in his office, surrounded by paperwork, and looking like a man who'd discovered something unpleasant. "Tell me you brought coffee," he said without looking up. "Tell me you found something useful." "I found something, all right. I'm not sure how useful it's going to be." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down. This is going to take a while." I sat, and Ben pulled out a yellow legal pad covered in his careful handwriting. "I spent the morning making phone calls," he said. "Old contacts from the force, a few people who owe me favors. I wanted to know more about your cousin Damon and your lawyer Felix." "And?" "And they're both dirtier than a gas station bathroom. Damon's got a record. Nothing major, mostly small-time fraud and con games. But he's been arrested 3 times in the past 5 years, and word is he's always looking for a bigger score." That didn't surprise me. Damon had always been the black sheep of the family, the one who showed up at holidays with get-rich-quick schemes and borrowed money he never paid back. "What about Felix?" Ben's expression darkened. Felix is more interesting. On the surface, he's exactly what he appears to be. Successful lawyer, good reputation, active in local politics. But he's also been walking a very fine line ethically. 3 complaints filed with the state bar in the past 2 years, all dismissed, but all involving conflicts of interest. What kind of conflicts? The kind where he represents both sides of a transaction without disclosing it. The kind where he has financial interests in deals he's supposedly providing neutral advice on. The kind that make you wonder how many other clients he's been playing. I thought about the codicil, about Felix's insistence that it was standard language, about the timing of everything. Ben, I said slowly, I think Felix wrote that codicil specifically to benefit Nola. I think he knew she was planning to marry me, and he made sure she'd have legal claim to half the estate if she did. That would explain why she was so interested in a quick engagement and a quick wedding. But it doesn't explain how she knew about the estate in the first place. I didn't tell her about it until recently. Ben was quiet for a moment, tapping his pen against the legal pad. What if she didn't learn about it from you? What if she learned about it from Felix? The pieces clicked together in my mind like tumblers in a lock. Felix had access to all the estate information. He knew the timeline, the asset values, the distribution schedule. If he'd been looking for a way to profit from that information. You think Felix told Nola about the estate and then convinced her to target me? I think Felix and Damon have been planning this for a while. I think they needed someone to get close to you, and Nola was their solution. But why would she go along with it? Ben reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a printout, what looked like a credit report or financial statement. Because Nola Varrow is broke, he said. Not just broke, but drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, student loans in default, car payments 3 months behind. She's been living on borrowed time and borrowed money for the past 2 years. I stared at the numbers on the page, trying to reconcile them with the woman I'd thought I knew. Nola had always seemed financially secure, expensive clothes, nice car, upscale apartment. But if Ben was right, it had all been an illusion. She needed money, I said. She needed money, and Felix and Damon offered her a way to get it. All she had to do was convince you to marry her before the estate was distributed. But why the engagement party? Why humiliate me publicly instead of just going through with the wedding? Ben's expression was grim. That's the part I haven't figured out yet. But I have a feeling we're not done discovering surprises. He was right about that. Over the next few hours, as we dug deeper into the connections between Felix, Damon, and Nola, we uncovered a web of relationships and financial arrangements that made my head spin. Shell companies, campaign contributions, real estate deals that didn't quite make sense. All of it connected, all of it pointing to a conspiracy that went far beyond a simple inheritance scam. But the biggest surprise came when I finally worked up the courage to go back to my apartment and check the laptop Nola had left there the week before. She'd been using it to work on wedding planning, she'd said, keeping track of vendors and guest lists and all the details that went into planning the perfect celebration. What I found instead were emails. Hundreds of them, stretching back almost 2 years. Emails between Nola and Damon, emails between Nola and Felix, emails between all 3 of them and people I'd never heard of, discussing plans and timelines and something they called the Orrin Project. I sat in my kitchen, reading through message after message, watching my relationship with Nola revealed as nothing more than an elaborate con game. They'd researched me, targeted me, manipulated me with surgical precision. Every conversation, every shared moment, every declaration of love, all of it calculated to achieve one goal: getting access to my grandmother's money. But the most damning email was the most recent one, sent just 3 days before the engagement party. It was from Felix to both Nola and Damon, and it was brief. Change of plans. The spousal inheritance strategy won't work. New case law makes it too risky. We need to pivot to Plan B immediately. Nola, You know what to do at the party. Make it public, make it final, and make sure there's no chance of reconciliation. We'll proceed with the contested will strategy instead. Plan B. The public humiliation hadn't been cruelty or second thoughts or cold feet. It had been strategy. They'd needed to make sure I would never take Nola back, never give her another chance to get close to the inheritance. The engagement party had been designed to burn bridges completely, to ensure that their backup plan could proceed without interference. I closed the laptop and sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the debris of my former life, feeling something I hadn't experienced since my grandmother's funeral. Absolute clarity. They'd played me perfectly, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left me alive to figure it out. The beautiful thing about being systematically betrayed is that it clarifies your priorities wonderfully. 3 days after the engagement party from hell, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Nola, Damon, and Felix thought they were playing chess while I was playing checkers. Time to show them otherwise. My first move was the simplest. I fired Felix. "Silas," he said when I called his office that morning, "I'm so glad to hear from you. I was worried about how you were handling everything after the unfortunate events at your party." "I'm handling it fine," I said, "which is why I'm terminating your representation of the estate, effective immediately." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "I'm sorry, I don't think I heard you correctly." "You heard me fine. I'm firing you. I'll be picking up all the estate documents this afternoon, and I'll be filing the necessary paperwork with the court to change representation." "Silas, I don't think you understand the complexity of the situation. Your cousin's challenge to the will requires experienced handling. This isn't the time to make emotional decisions." "You're right," I said. "It's time to make smart ones." I hung up before he could respond. My second move was more complicated. I needed a new lawyer, and I needed one who specialized in exactly the kind of mess Felix had created. After 3 hours of research and phone calls, I found her. Margaret Chen, no relation to my downstairs neighbor, was a partner at one of San Francisco's most prestigious firms, specializing in estate litigation and legal malpractice. Her office was even more impressive than Felix's, but she wore her success with the kind of quiet confidence that came from actually earning it rather than just projecting it. "Mr. Orrin," she said after I'd explained the situation, "what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of attorney misconduct, possibly criminal misconduct. Can you prove it? With the emails you've shown me?" "Probably. But I want to be clear about what you're getting into. If we pursue this aggressively, it's going to get ugly. These people will fight back, and they'll fight dirty." "Good," I said. "I'm counting on it." Margaret smiled for the first time since I'd walked into her office. "In that case, let's discuss strategy." The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than just defending against Damon's challenge to the will, we were going to go on the offensive. Margaret would file complaints against Felix with both the state bar and the district attorney's office, alleging fraud, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty. She would also file a civil suit against all 3 conspirators, seeking damages for their attempted theft. But the most satisfying part of the plan was what Margaret called the disclosure strategy. "Your cousin's challenge to the will is based on forged documents," she explained. "We can prove that through handwriting analysis and forensic examination. But more importantly, we can prove that Felix knew they were forged and that he was working with your cousin to defraud you." "How does that help?" "Because once we establish the conspiracy, everything else unravels. Nola's involvement, the targeting, the attempted marriage fraud, it all becomes part of the same criminal enterprise. And criminal enterprises have a way of making the news." I thought about Nola's horror at being publicly embarrassed at the engagement party. She hadn't seen anything yet. "When do we start?" I asked. "We already have. I filed the preliminary paperwork this morning." That afternoon, I drove to Felix's office to collect the estate documents. The receptionist, who'd been so friendly before now, looked at me like I was carrying a contagious disease. Felix himself was nowhere to be seen. "Mr. Rord is in court," she said, not meeting my eyes. "That's fine, I just need the documents." She handed me 2 boxes of files with the kind of reluctance usually reserved for turning over evidence to the police, which, I realized, was probably exactly what this felt like from her perspective. As I carried the boxes to my car, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Silas?" The voice was female, nervous, familiar. "Who is this?" "It's Kara Venner, Nola's maid of honor." I almost hung up. Kara had been part of Nola's inner circle, one of the women who'd helped plan the engagement party, who'd smiled and congratulated me while knowing exactly what was going to happen. "What do you want, Kara?" "I want to talk. About Nola, about what happened. I think there are things you need to know." "I know everything I need to know." "No," she said urgently. "You don't. Please, Silas, just give me 10 minutes. There's a coffee shop on Union Street, Pete's. Can you meet me there in an hour?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. Pete's was crowded with the afternoon coffee rush, but I spotted Kara immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, looking nothing like the polished socialite who'd been at the engagement party. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, she wore no makeup, and her hands shook slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "Thank you for coming," she said, as I sat down across from her. "You have 10 minutes. I know you hate me right now. I know you think I was part of what happened to you, and you're right, I was. But not the way you think." I waited. "Nola approached me about 6 months ago," Kara continued. "She said she was planning to surprise you with an engagement party, and she wanted my help organizing it. She offered to pay me, a lot of money, to coordinate everything." "How much money?" $50,000. For party planning." Kara laughed bitterly. I should have known something was wrong right then. Nobody pays $50,000 to plan an engagement party, not even in San Francisco. "But you took the money." "I took the money. My husband had just left me. I was drowning in legal bills from the divorce, and $50,000 seemed like a miracle. I didn't ask too many questions about where it was coming from or why she was being so generous." "When did you figure out what was really happening?" "The night before the party. Nola called me, completely panicked. She said there had been a change of plans, that she wasn't going to marry you after all. She told me what she was planning to say at the party, and she asked me to make sure it was all recorded." "You recorded it?" Kara nodded miserably. "Multiple angles. She wanted proof that she'd ended the engagement publicly, proof that there was no chance of reconciliation. She said it was important for legal reasons." The pieces clicked into place. Felix's email had mentioned making the breakup public and final. They'd needed documentation that the engagement was truly over, probably to support whatever backup plan they were pursuing. "Where are the recordings now?" "That's why I wanted to talk to you. Nola never paid me the rest of the money she owed. And after what I saw at the party, after how she humiliated you." Kara reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital camera. "I thought you might want these." I took the camera and scrolled through the files. There were dozens of videos and photos from the engagement party, including several clear recordings of Nola's speech. But there were also older files, photos from what looked like planning meetings, videos of Nola practicing her speech, even a recording of a phone conversation between Nola and someone I couldn't identify. "Kara," I said slowly, "this is evidence of conspiracy." "I know. That's why I'm giving it to you instead of deleting it." She stood up, leaving her coffee unfinished. "I'm sorry, Silas. I'm sorry I was part of this. And I'm sorry about what they did to you. But maybe now you can do something about it." After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, scrolling through the files on the camera. The photos were damning enough. Images of Nola meeting with both Damon and Felix, documents spread across tables, handshakes and smiles that looked distinctly conspiratorial. But the videos were even better. In one, Nola practiced her engagement party speech, trying out different versions of the same cruel message. In another, she was on the phone with someone, Felix, based on what I could hear, discussing backup strategies and contingency plans. And in the longest video, recorded just 2 days before the party, Nola was sitting in what looked like Felix's office, with both Felix and Damon present. The audio quality was poor, but I could make out enough to understand the conversation. "The marriage strategy is off the table," Felix was saying. "Too risky, legally speaking. We need to pivot to the will contest." "But that could take months," Nola protested. "I can't keep up this charade much longer." "You won't have to," Damon said. "Once you end the engagement publicly, you're done. Felix and I will handle the rest." "And I still get my cut?" "You still get your cut. 200,000, just like we agreed." $200,000. That's what my relationship had been worth to them. That's what they'd been willing to pay to destroy my life. But as I sat there listening to them plan my betrayal, I realized something important. They just handed me everything I needed to destroy them right back. I called Margaret Chen from the coffee shop. "I have new evidence," I said. "Video evidence. And I think it changes everything." "How so?" "Because now we don't just have proof of the conspiracy, we have proof of how much money they were planning to steal, and we have them on record admitting it." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Can you bring the recordings to my office first thing tomorrow?" "I can bring them now." "Even better. And Silas? I think it's time to call the FBI." The FBI. I hadn't considered federal involvement, but Margaret explained that the conspiracy crossed state lines. Nola had family money coming from Texas, Damon had connections in Nevada, and Felix's political activities involved federal campaign finance laws. What had started as a simple inheritance scam had become something much larger. By the time I left Margaret's office that evening, the machinery of justice was already in motion. Federal investigators would review the evidence. State bar investigators would examine Felix's conduct. The district attorney's office would consider criminal charges. But more importantly, the story would become public. Margaret had contacts at several local news outlets, and she assured me that a story this scandalous, with video evidence and federal involvement, would be front-page news within days. I drove home through the San Francisco evening, past the glittering towers of downtown and the crowded streets of the Mission, thinking about justice and revenge and the difference between the two. For 3 days, I'd been the victim of an elaborate con game, the fool who'd been played by people who thought they were smarter than me. Tomorrow, the world would start to see who had really been playing whom. My phone buzzed with a text message as I parked outside my apartment. Unknown number. "We need to talk. This doesn't have to get ugly. F." I deleted the message without responding. Felix was right that this didn't have to get ugly. It was going to get much worse than ugly. The story broke on a Wednesday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon, my phone had become a weapon of mass communication. Reporters, old friends, distant relatives, and complete strangers all wanted to talk to the man whose engagement party had become a federal case. The headline in the San Francisco Chronicle read, "Local lawyer charged in elaborate inheritance scam." The story had everything journalists loved: betrayal, conspiracy, romance gone wrong, and enough money to make it interesting. By noon, it had been picked up by 3 television stations and half a dozen online news sites. I was sitting in Margaret Chen's office, watching the coverage on her wall-mounted television, when my phone rang. Ben's name on the screen. "Have you seen the news?" he asked. "I'm living the news." "No, I mean the other news. About Nola." Margaret muted the television and looked at me with interest. "What about Nola?" I put Ben on speaker. "Tell us." "She's been arrested. FBI picked her up about an hour ago at her apartment. Apparently, she tried to run when she saw the news coverage this morning, but they were already watching her." Margaret smiled with the satisfaction of a chess player who'd just announced checkmate. Wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. She's looking at serious federal time. "What about Damon and Felix?" Damon's already in custody. Felix is probably being arrested as we speak. Ben's voice carried the grim satisfaction of a former cop watching justice work the way it was supposed to. Turns out the FBI had been investigating Felix's political activities for months. Your case just gave them the evidence they needed to move. After Ben hung up, Margaret and I spent another hour going over the legal implications. The criminal cases would proceed independently of our civil suit, but they strengthened our position considerably. With video evidence and federal backing, we could pursue damages not just for the attempted theft, but for emotional distress, defamation, and punitive damages. How much are we talking about? I asked. Conservatively? 7 figures. These people destroyed your reputation, attempted to steal your inheritance, and caused you significant emotional trauma. A jury is going to want to send a message. 7 figures. More money than my grandmother's entire estate. Enough to ensure that even if they somehow avoided prison time, they'd be financially ruined for the rest of their lives. It felt like justice, but it also felt like something more than justice. It felt like revenge. That evening, I drove to my grandmother's house in Marin County for the first time since her funeral. The probate court had cleared the estate that afternoon. With Felix's conspiracy exposed, Damon's challenge had collapsed immediately. The house was mine now, officially and legally. It was a small craftsman bungalow with a view of the bay, the kind of place that represented the California dream for my grandmother's generation. She'd bought it in 1962 for $8,000 and had lived there for 60 years, watching the neighborhood change around her, watching the value climb into the millions. I sat on the front porch as the sun set over the water, thinking about the past week and the strange turns my life had taken. 7 days ago, I'd been engaged to a woman I thought I loved, planning a future that seemed bright and secure. Now I was single, wealthy, and famous for all the wrong reasons. My phone rang, unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Texas. Hello, Silas, this is Patricia Varrow, Nola's mother. I almost hung up, but something in her voice stopped me. She sounded tired, defeated, nothing like the imperious woman I'd met at family gatherings. Mrs. Varrow, I want you to know that I had no idea what Nola was planning. None of us did. We thought she'd finally found someone who made her happy. She did find someone who made her happy, I said. She found my bank account. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. I know you have no reason to believe me, but Nola wasn't always like this. She used to be a good person, before the debt, before the desperation. I think she got in over her head and couldn't find a way out. So she decided to drag me down with her. I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm not even asking you to drop the charges. I just wanted you to know that somewhere underneath all the lies and manipulation, there was a part of her that genuinely cared about you. After she hung up, I sat on the porch for another hour, watching the lights come on across the bay. Patricia Varrow was probably right that Nola had cared about me, at least initially. But she'd cared about money more, and when forced to choose between love and greed, she'd chosen greed. The difference was, I'd never had to make that choice. Even now, with the civil suit promising millions in damages, money wasn't what motivated me. What motivated me was the principle of the thing, the idea that people shouldn't be allowed to destroy other people's lives without consequences. What motivated me was justice. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The trials took place over the following months, and they were everything Margaret had predicted. The federal prosecutors had built an airtight case against all 3 conspirators, with video evidence, financial records, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Felix was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and violation of attorney ethics, sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and disbarment. Damon was convicted of conspiracy and fraud, sentenced to 3 years. Nola was convicted of wire fraud and conspiracy, sentenced to 2 years. The civil trial was even more satisfying. With the criminal convictions as evidence, the jury awarded damages of $2.4 million, more than Margaret had predicted, more than I'd dreamed possible. It was enough to ensure that even after they served their prison sentences, all three conspirators would be paying for their crimes for the rest of their lives. But the most satisfying moment came not in the courtroom, but in the hallway outside, after the civil verdict was read. Nola was there with her lawyer, waiting for the elevator, when she saw me approaching. "Silas," she said, and for a moment she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with 2 years earlier. Vulnerable, beautiful, human. "Nola, I want you to know that I'm sorry, not just about getting caught, but about what I did to you. You deserved better." "Yes," I said simply. "I did." The elevator arrived, and she stepped inside. As the doors closed, she looked at me one last time, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't expected. Relief. Like she was finally free of the lies she'd been living, finally able to stop pretending to be someone she wasn't. Maybe Patricia Varrow had been right. Maybe there had been a part of Nola that genuinely cared about me. But it didn't matter now. What mattered was that justice had been served, that the people who'd tried to destroy my life had been held accountable for their actions. What mattered was that I'd won. 6 months later, I was living full-time in my grandmother's house, working as an independent consultant and dating a woman I'd met at a bookstore in Mill Valley. Her name was Jennifer. She was a high school teacher, and she had no interest in my money beyond the fact that it meant I could afford to take her to nice restaurants occasionally. The engagement ring, my grandmother's ring, sat in a safety deposit box at the bank, waiting for the right moment and the right person. I wasn't in any hurry. I'd learned the value of taking things slowly, of really getting to know someone before making life-changing commitments. I'd also learned the value of being very, very careful about who you trust. But mostly I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well, moving forward, and refusing to let other people's cruelty define your future. Though I had to admit, watching your enemies go to prison didn't hurt either. The last time I saw any of the conspirators was at Felix's disbarment hearing, where I testified about his misconduct. He looked older, grayer, diminished by the weight of his crimes and their consequences. When I finished testifying, he caught my eye and nodded slightly. Not in greeting, but in what might have been acknowledgement or even respect. I nodded back, not because I forgave him, but because I understood something he was finally learning. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are exactly what you deserve. As I walked out of the hearing room and into the San Francisco afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that night at the engagement party. Complete closure. The story was finished, the accounts were settled, and the future was mine to write. And this time,